Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate all of that. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Really glad to see some faces. And I've been on this book tour for almost a week now, I guess, so going around to different places, libraries, and so on. And as usual, appreciating public libraries. I always think they're really wonderful community resources, and museums. My name's Judy, as you know, and I'm from Nelson, and I have been retired from my job at Selkirk College as an instructor for about over 20 years now. And before that, I grew up in the Kootenays to some extent, also in Alberta. My family traveled around, and after I was married, my husband and I traveled around. We lived in the Yukon. We lived in different dam sites. He was a surveyor, and he worked for a construction company. And so moved around a lot of places, and we ended up in Nelson. I also have done a lot of work in early childhood care and education, and have been very active provincially in opening resources and childcare centers and different kinds of boards and committees that, thank goodness, are having some effect. So that's my kind of political push, is getting more childcare that's of good value happening. And I know a number of staff who work in centers here, so they're graduates of mine from Selkirk. So I am going to start with explaining a little bit about the background of the story. And first of all, I'll just point out my props here. So are a lot of you familiar with Kootenay Lake, north end of Kootenay Lake? Yeah. Yes, some no. So the north end of Kootenay Lake sort of gets closer to more dramatic Purcell Mountains as you go farther north. And this painting is done by a friend of mine of Mount Willett, which is at the very far northern tip of Kootenay Lake on the east side. And my friend lives actually below the mountain on the flat part of the valley and looks straight at this mountain. So she made a painting of Mount Willett, which is what I've used for the poster, and I've used it for the cover of the books and things. Gorgeous painting, and she's absolutely delighted that her painting is copyrighted in a book. And then another friend of mine did a painting of the courthouse in Nelson, which also is featured in the book. And so it's the big granite blocks. It's on a corner that you go past on the highway when you're driving through Nelson. And she is also thrilled that her painting is copyrighted in a book. So there you go. That's a good benefit right off the bat. And I did also bring, for any of you who are history buffs about the East and West Kootenay, I brought some survey maps from 1909. These are from BC Archives, and they show East and West Kootenay. They're actually designed for mining exploration, and they were done by BC land surveyors at the time. They are really fascinating to me because they actually show the railroad tracks. There were railroad tracks everywhere. And it's amazing that so many of them have disappeared now. They just don't exist anymore. Lots of them are rail trails, as you know, but so feel free to come and look at these if you'd like. You can get these, if you're interested at all in this type of history, off of BC Archives. You can search it, and you can have the maps available to you. So things that feature in the book are Mount Willett, and I'm just going to go, I think I can still go around the corner. This is the Moye. So if you've been to Caslow, you've seen the historic SS Moye sternwheeler that ran on Kootenay Lake until 1958. started in 1898, ran until 1958. And it has been restored, fully restored into historic Government of Canada site. So it's really interesting to go into. So this picture was actually taken in 1958. The Moyer is at the dock in Argenta, which is the place where most of the action starts, at least in the story. And you can see how the boat is so big that only the little front door actually fits with the dock, and that's what they had to use to load and unload things. I love this picture for several reasons. One is it shows just how impressive the Moyer was, and it shows the flats. So behind the boat, you can see a flat line of trees, and cottonwood trees. They're all cottonwoods, and those are on the valley at the base of the mountains. And so the Duncan River comes through that valley, and this flat that is also in the book a lot, and it's so interesting to me that it's just so flat. And I talk about it quite a bit in the story, about where things are. This picture was actually taken when my husband was 14. He and his family and several other Quaker families moved from Southern California to Argenta, and they drove their old vehicles all the way from Southern California to Argenta, which was quite a journey. And this little truck, which you can't see from where you are, but you can come and have a look if you want, on the dock, is one of the little vehicles that was used to haul stuff over incredibly bad roads all the way from Southern California. They came across the border at, what's the crossing at Creston? Yeah, with their convoy. And then they got their materials onto barges and got up the lake. So it was quite a journey for them. So this picture was taken by them, and it's actually belongs to my brother-in-law. But anyway, so those are props. So I don't do slides or anything like that. I mostly talk. So the book started for me when I was 17 years old, because I lived in Calgary. My family lived in Calgary. My dad was a university professor. We lived in a variety of different places. And I went to Argenta and lived with a family and worked for the summer with another friend of mine. So I went there for 3 summers, actually, and then went back to Calgary, went to school, et cetera, went to university. And I became fascinated with a story that was told to me by my to-be husband. He wasn't my husband, obviously, at the time, but we did get married after a few years. So he had told me this story about some people in the community. And the story starts with 2 fellows in Switzerland who got a land preemption in the Kootenays, on Kootenay Lake, to build fruit orchards. And so I describe, in the book, I talk about these people. So those 2 fellows decide to come to Canada, and the brother of one of them comes as well. So 3 men come in 1909. They actually come and they take the Moyer, they go up the lake, and they work. And that's where my story starts. And then eventually, over the years, their families come along and so on, and I'll read a couple of excerpts of this kind of thing. And then there's conflict, and then there's a murder, and then there's a trial in 1922 in the courthouse in Nelson, which is why I have a picture of the courthouse in the book. And so it's quite an interesting outcome to that trial. So the book is based totally on real events. The names of the people have been changed, and the interactions between people, of course, I had to imagine. I had to try to figure out how would they interact with each other. How would they talk to each other? And my biggest question in my own head was, how would men talk to each other in 1910 when they're working in the bush? I don't have a clue. I really don't know how that works. And I kept wondering, would they swear? Like, I don't know, all the guys that work in the bush that I have ever known swear all the time. Like, I don't know. You'd be surprised how many times that went through my head. You know, a stupid question. So there's no swearing in the book.
You have to imagine that.
Yeah, you have to imagine swearing if you want it. So a friend of mine said, thank goodness, I wouldn't want to read a book though. I mean, there's too much swearing now anyway. That's one of the things. There are two names in the book of people that are real. One is my grandfather, who was Harry MacArthur, and he moved to Nelson in 1918. My dad was 3 years old at the time, and he was a school teacher, and he later became the first principal of Trafalgar Junior High School in Nelson, which was one of the first junior highs in BC, actually. And so when this murder occurred, here he is living in Nelson, the murder occurred, and he heard about this happening, and he was a great fisherman. He had a rowboat. He had a Walton rowboat. I don't know if you folks have heard of a Walton rowboat, but very, very famous wooden rowboat, highly prized. And he rowed the boat all the way from Nelson to Balfour, to the north end of Kootenay Lake, to see if he could see where this happened. And he couldn't find anybody. So he rowed back again. And then he went to the entire trial in the courthouse. He managed to squeeze it in between the end of his holidays and days of work, and he went to the trial. And of course, I didn't know this. I had no idea that my grandfather had any connection in any way to the story. And one time before my dad died, I was talking about the story a little bit with him, and he said, oh yeah, I remember Dad said he went to that trial. And I thought, oh, wow, I really wish I could talk to my granddad now. That would be so fantastic. So anyway, I've made him the narrator of the story. So I wanted him to have a role in the story because to me, this was just such a significant connection with the story. So, as I mentioned, it starts off with 3 men getting a land preemption in the north end of Kootenay Lake. And they go through a lot of trials and tribulations. The first bit that I will read is part of the prologue to the book. The cerulean blue of the sky was breathtaking as the morning light intensified. First, brilliant shards of sunlight speared between the double peaks of Mount Willett and laid the mountain's shadow over the precipitous cliffs on the far side of the wide lake. The guardian mountain possessed vision that extended into the distance. It accepted the truths of life and death without judgment, without accusation or blame. The early morning breeze down the mountainside was sweet, with the light forest fragrance. It tickled the tall corn stalks in the garden, beginning the delicate dance that started a new day. As was usual in the early morning, a tall, robust man prepared to milk his cow. His muscular biceps stretched the sleeves of his light shirt. His dark eyes reflected cool annoyance. Striding confidently toward the cowshed, he neared the door where a small man with a rifle was hidden. Without the tall man knowing, the rifle was carefully aimed at his chest. Inside the shed, the small man was struggling to keep the rifle level as his heart galloped and his shoulders vibrated. The years of festering hate resonated throughout his body. He knew that if the tall man hadn't so carefully instructed him on the use of the rifle years ago, this moment wouldn't be happening. So that's the beginning of the prologue. And obviously, that's, over time in the story. So I thought I'd do, 2 or 3 little readings, not long ones, but feel free to ask, we can certainly do lots of questions and so on at the end. So these fellows had to work really hard. And after a few years, they got a job. So Thomas and Wilbert and Hubert. Wilbert and Hubert are the brothers, and Thomas is the friend. And they were retrieving logs that were stuck on the banks of the Duncan River at floods, and so they were trying to pull logs out and get them into log booms. And Thomas had a boat with a really cranky motor, actually a gas motor, which I didn't believe when I first read about this, because I did 5 years of research to put the information into the book, and I actually didn't believe that could be true. But I looked it up, and sure enough, I found a picture of a little teeny-weeny old motor that was in existence at that point. So I guess it's true. Anyway, it was in newspaper articles that I researched. Okay, so they're trying to retrieve logs. Hubert and Wilbert's job was to catch logs using a 10-foot-long wooden pike pole with a sharp metal hook attached to the end. Reaching as far as they could, they snagged the logs with the hook and pulled them out into the current, where they could attach a choker line and tow them to the boat. For several minutes, they were successful in grabbing logs, until suddenly, with a violent jolt, the boat was struck on the side by a floating tree with branches that were still attached and waving angrily on the water. Both Wilbert and Hubert were ejected into the furious waters. They submerged before they realized what happened, and they struggled to get back to the boat. They were fighting to keep their heads above water. Hubert was flailing wildly in the water, and he saw that Wilbert had gotten back into the boat, so he screamed louder and louder. Thomas pushed the pike pole as far as he could. Hubert could only grasp the slippery metal hook on the end, but not keep it in his hand. The sharp hook intended to stab the logs tore into his hand, and blood spurted forth. He cried out in pain. "Help, help!" He again grabbed the pole and then disappeared, and finally he was no longer in sight. So they went back and forth because the boat had drifted away. It took them a long time to find the body, but finally they did. And then they had to try to get the body back into the boat. The dead weight was unwieldy. The loose limbs waved without intention. Wilbert's arms trembled with exhaustion. Finally, they were successful, and Hubert lay in a heap in the bottom of the boat. Both men fought back their horror and forced themselves to stare at the river, and rather than their lifeless partner. They had no energy to say anything to each other. Wilbert's mind raced with the thoughts, "This is Thomas's fault. What will I do without Hubert? How can I tell our family?" So they got the body out, and they buried the body high on the side of Mount Willett, where their land was. So that's sort of a touch of the beginning of the real animosity between these two men, between Thomas and Wilbert. And that death hung over their shoulders for the rest of their lives. So then Wilbert went back to Switzerland right at the beginning of the First World War, actually, and he found a wife, thanks to his sisters. His sisters were very involved in finding a wife that they thought was suitable, and so they got married, and she spoke French. They were French-Swiss, so they all were French-speaking, and she came separately from Wilbert. Because of some delays, she went to visit her sister in Spokane, and to learn some English words, actually. Only learned 6 words, so she wasn't too impressed with that. But she made her way on the train to Nelson and onto the Moyer boat to go up the lake to Argenta. And her sister had made a little sign to put on her coat that said, "I speak no English." So she actually traveled the whole way with this little sign on her coat. And it was really hard for her because she was 18 years old, young, gregarious, chatty. She really liked to meet all the people on the boat and find out what the best food was. And the moyer was very elegant, actually, meals and things like that. So it was disappointing, but she got there. And then eventually, over the years, so now I'm skipping ahead to 1916, because that was 1914. She has learned some English, and she loves to go once a week to mail day, because the boat brought mail once a week. And, excuse me, probably some of you have lived in places where you only got mail once a week, and what a big deal it is to get mail when you finally get it. So she had learned quite a few words in English by that time. So mail day was the best chance for Eliza to chat with her neighbors without seeming too nosy. One day she was by herself, and even though she understood English better, she was still shy about starting conversation. She stood near 3 women who were whispering around the corner of the mail shed. Liza desperately tried to hear what they were saying. Mrs. Hannah, who had befriended Liza, sounded afraid. Her usually soft, dark eyes looked alarmed, and her smooth forehead was wrinkled in a deep frown. "Red McLeod," she said, and then repeated the name, Red McLeod. Philippek said he saw him on the trail up Hamel Creek. Mrs. Hannah nodded vehemently. It was definitely him. Liza didn't know the other women, but she could hear their conversations. One of them stated, "My husband said he's a drunken horse thief and he's always up to no good." The other woman, looking shocked, exclaimed, "You mean we have a criminal here? What does he look like?" "My husband told me to watch out for him," says Mrs. Hannah. "He's got a mane of red hair the color of carrot and rides a tall gray horse. His penetrating, intense blue eyes are intimidating, and he towers over most men. He speaks in a Scottish accent. The Mounties from Fort Steele can't catch him. He's a devious trickster for sure." The other woman, who was named Beryl, agreed. "I heard that he steals a chicken from the farmyard, then he goes to another farmer and offers to sell the animal and pockets the cash. And then he steals the same animal again, and he takes it back to the first owner saying he found it, and he'd sell it back to him again, making even more profit from the same animal." When Liza got home, she confronted Wilbert. "You didn't tell me about this man, Red McLeod. The women say he's been seen here, and he's huge." Wilbert, in his cautious way, looked at Liza and smiled. He pulled the curved pipe from his mouth and patted her hand. "Nothing to worry about. Thomas said he heard the police caught him in Duncan City." "Have you ever seen him?" "Only one time. I went past the cabin and I thought it was him. He's really big. I didn't really get a good look at him. Well, yeah, his horse is really big too. But I know he has red hair. The police finally took him in hand, so no need to worry about it," reassured Wilbert. But then he quietly mumbled under his breath, "Unless he tricks them and gets away again." Fortunately, Liza didn't hear his comment as she went into the kitchen to begin cooking dinner. So Red McLeod shows up a few times in my book. So how many of you have ever heard of Red McLeod? None of you? Oh, okay. So he's very famous, actually, as famous here as he was in the West Kootenay. The mounted police at Fort Steele had him on their radar all the time because he would go to the farms around here and steal horses and take them over either the Hamel Creek Pass or the other one, the one farther north. The Grey Creek, yeah, Grey Creek Pass. And so he'd take them down into the West Kootenay, and when he would, the police would chase him because they knew that he had stolen some horses. And he would get to a certain point, especially around the Tata Creek area, and he would wave at the police because there was a boundary there, and he'd say, sorry, sorry, Tata, Tata, and off he'd go because they couldn't go past the boundary apparently. So that's the story that my husband told me about him. He also is in the BC archives. There are quite a few stories about him. He was definitely big and threatening and Scottish and redheaded and loved to steal lots of things. And he had 2 cabins. He must have had a cabin here, I don't know where, but he did have a couple of cabins in the West Kootenay. He had a cabin in Argentina. He had a cabin, I think, in Ainsworth, actually, I heard at one point. So he was a pretty interesting guy. And he lived a life of crime and robbery for a long, long time. And then eventually he became partners with another man, and they started a legal business. I think they ran a hotel. And after a few years, he applied to have his criminal record dissolved, and he was successful. He was a tricky guy. Like, he knew all the ins and outs of everything. So, yeah. So anyway, he's in the book in a few places. So I think that's enough talking about this stuff. I welcome questions, thoughts. Yep.
If you could explain in more depth how it is they received the land. Like, was it free? Was it in order to encourage people to come to Canada?
Yep.
I don't know that word that you used.
Land, yeah. Yeah, so the Canadian government wanted to get more people to come to Canada to settle. They were trying to get settlers to come in. And so they advertised all over the place. They had beautiful posters of the hillsides and fruit orchards growing beautiful fruit trees that had fat, ripe apples and all kinds of things like that. So actually, if you tour the Moyenne today, you'll see some of those posters inside the boat. They actually have some of the posters. So they offered land preemptions, and I think, I know some of this happened on the prairies too, and I think they were land preemptions on the prairies as well. I'm not sure they were called that, but they certainly were in BC. And they signed a contract to have a preemption on this land. The cost to them was very, very small. I'm not sure exactly what it was. I have looked that up, and I couldn't find a fixed figure on costs. But it was very common. It was certainly all around the Arrow Lakes too. They did that a lot, and around Kootenay Lake. I think there are some orchards still at Proctor on Kootenay Lake, where the families of some of those original people still live. So they have like 3 or 4 generations there. Yeah, so it was a way to get people to come from Europe. That was the point. And quite a few people did come. And I imagine, like, they started it after, in the early 1900s, but my guess is that as Europe got closer and closer to the Great War, there were probably quite a few people who were interested in coming. And probably the numbers got larger at that point. Any other questions? Yeah? So it took me 5 years of research to write the book. And you were saying it took you 5 years of research to write the book that you wrote about a different incident, but it was in the Crow's Nest Pass, right? Yeah, yeah. So it takes a long time to write a book when you're doing a lot of research. So it's not all your imagination, but you're having to try to make it historically accurate to mostly, to the greatest degree that you can. So that takes a very long period of time to wait around and follow up things, go down a million rabbit holes and dig out details and that kind of thing. Yeah. Did you publish? Who did you publish your book with?
Durval.
Pardon?
Durval.
Oh.
And Uproot, they're a Calgary-based publisher.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And did you have a deal with them before you finished writing it, or did they know that you were coming up?
I just did it. I had it done, and I just submitted it.
Uh-huh.
And they took it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Great.
Some people kind of just plan a book, submit the plan to a publisher. When the publisher is interested, then they write the book, etc. I basically had mine done. I just
Right.
write as a hobby. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
How long from the time that you finished the book in your mind to when it got published? How much time is that?
Well, I went with a company called Friesen Publishing, which is semi-self-publishing, and I was working with them for a total of about a year and a half. Okay. And so when I started working with them, I actually hired a content editor and a copy editor, like some other beginning editors. And with them, you do a contract. So you can start submitting manuscripts to them, and right away you get some feedback on it. And so, it takes a while to go through those processes. And then, like at one point late, so like a year ago, I guess, or so, last fall, I made some significant adds to it in a few places. So then I had to go back and redo a copy editor reviewing things in the book. So, it's a different way to publish, but it did get me right away. As soon as I made the decision, I had the book actually published a year and a half or a little bit more from that point. I have many friends who takes 7 years to get a publisher. Iona Wishaw, I don't know did she come here, Iona Wishaw? She's a very famous mystery writer. She was touring the Kootenays last week, and she has a 12-book series of mystery books, and her first book, she tried to get published, no interest. She wrote 3 books. It took her almost 7 years before they would even look at the first book. And then she got a contract, and now she's with a certain company. But the publishing business is actually really tough unless you have a publisher like you did, obviously, that you could get easy contact with. So that was why I went with Friesen, because it meant that it was easier for me to work with them. They're extremely supportive. They have tons of resources to help in the publishing world, and just constant assistance, and I really appreciated that. Yeah. Yes?
Sorry. Go ahead.
When you write you talked about the fact that the book is about a true story, but you fictionalized it. So are there any people other than your great-grandfather that you would have contacted and said, would there be any family members who would read themselves into the book? Did you talk to any family?
Well, the family involved in the actual meat of the story has people still alive in the area, and I have contacted one of them, and that family, they're very shy about what happened, regardless of the outcome, which if you read the book you'll see the outcome is actually quite surprising, but they are very shy about it. So I made sure that any family members knew that I was not using any real family names, and they knew that. They accept that. And so It's, you know, it's as good as I can do. It's over 100-year-old story. It's factual. It's a real trial with real evidence, all that kind of stuff, yeah.
I was going to ask if you had a particular favorite part of your book. Do you ever get kind of like, ooh?
Oh. Oh, that's a really good question. I think the beginning of the trial. I mean, actually, I really like it, all of it, but I think the beginning of the trial is kind of like, oh, okay, well, I'll tell you a serendipitous thing that happened. A lot of serendipitous things happened when I was writing the book. And one of them was that I started to write the section on the trial. And at that point, I was taking some creative writing courses, and so I was doing sections, just parts, and I started to write that section. And at that point in time, there was somebody that went to Argenta and broke into a house. The person that lived there was not there. And a person broke in, and they found a rifle, and they found ammunition, and they raided the garden, and they would not leave when the caretaker of the house came. And so they brought in the RCMP from Caslow, and this fellow, you know, threatened with his rifle and with a few shots and so on. So they brought in SWAT teams from the Okanagan and from Cranbrook to Argenta. Argenta is a teeny weeny little place with little winding roads that like one car wide roads. They had 56 RCMP in Argenta for this effort. And the guy was then getting quite gun happy, and he did shoot a lot more, and he shot one of the RCMP officers. He did not kill him, but he did injure him quite a bit. And so that had happened, you know, previous, like about 6 months before I was actually starting to write the trial. But then, just when I was starting to write the trial, they had the trial of that fellow, because they took him into custody, obviously, took him into Nelson, into the court. So I went to the whole trial. This was in the middle of COVID. I didn't think they'd let me go into the courthouse, but I did, and they did let me go in. The courthouse benches, you know, long benches, probably longer than these rows of seats, but they had paper stuck on the seats, so you could only have like 3 people sitting on a whole bench. They couldn't really keep people out because trials are public, actually, so they couldn't keep people out of it. And so I went to 9 days of trial of that fellow in the Nelson courthouse. So I just sat there, and it's the very same courthouse. I just absorbed it. I absorbed how the light came in the windows. I absorbed the floors. I absorbed the walls, and the echoes, you know, the sounds, how the sounds went. I toured the jail cells, which had actually been upgraded, thank goodness, from the 1922 jail cells. But I really got to know the courthouse really well. And so that's what I put into my writing of the trial, is that 9 days of sitting in that courthouse and taking all this trial in. And of course, all these RCMP officers were coming in waves to testify, and they would stand outside at break time. Everybody has to leave the courtroom when the judge leaves, so we'd all have to go stand outside. So stand outside, and there would be a little cluster of RCMP officers standing there talking to each other, you know, like really soft voices, and I would kind of sneak over and try to see if I could get any juicy little bits out of them, which didn't work. They probably saw me sneaking over, but anyway, I never got a decent word out of those guys. Except I did talk to one of them who was a weapons expert, because I wanted to know about the type of rifle that was used in the story, and I got all that information from many newspaper articles. That's where I got that information, and so I really wanted to bounce that off somebody who knew weapons. I mean, I know nothing about weapons. I'm probably not supposed to touch this thing. Anyway, so I really picked his brains about weapons, and he was very helpful about the type of rifle, what it could do, its capabilities, how far it could shoot, and blah, blah, blah. You know, a lot of details on the gun, which was very helpful to me because, of course, I was totally clueless. But so the whole incident about the trial was just so embellished by and built up by my experience of attending that trial. I learned how they do exhibits, what they do about them, where they put them, you know, what the judge does, everybody. It's all very procedural, and so I did put that into my writing. So I'd say that's probably some of my favorite part. And I had a friend of mine who was doing some content editing for me, and I took some of that out. And she said, she read it, and she said, "What are you doing? You can't take that out. Like, that just makes the trial to have all that procedural accuracy in there is really important." So I put it back in. So there you go. You had a question, I think.
Yeah. What was your favorite piece of evidence that you found, like doing the research?
Sorry, could you say that a little louder?
What's your favorite piece of research that you discovered while working on your book?
Okay, my favorite piece that nobody else knew about. I'll tell you what that was. It was about that brother drowning. So there'd been lots of stories about these people coming, the fruit orchards, the business, or how hard they had to work, et cetera, et cetera. And life was really tough. Life was really, really tough. And so everybody knew lots of stories about that. And they hadn't heard, so the community people, the people at Lardo, Meadow Creek, you know, Caslow, lots of people have heard about this story, and they hadn't heard about this drowning in the Duncan River. And I learned about it by going through, for many, many hours, going through archives and reading old newspapers starting in 1909. And you know, I don't know if you've ever seen the old newspapers, but the sheets are like this big. And the print is like smaller than the tip of your fingernail. And basically it takes a magnifying glass to read them. And I went through page after page looking for articles of anything that I could find relating to this story. And sure enough, I found this story, 2 stories about the drowning. And so I put the drowning in the book, and then several people read that, and they actually phoned me. They called me and they said, "I never heard that before. Is that true? Did that really happen?" So that was probably my favorite discovery through research. Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes you do find things in research that you don't expect. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? If not, yeah. So there are books for sale if you're interested. Yeah.
Interested afterwards. Obviously, you can see Miss Judy has some books out for display. Over here, she's got a signing table set up. So if you guys are interested in learning a little bit more about the books or having a flip through, I'm sure you're welcome. But let's just say thanks to Miss Judy for coming in this evening. And
Thank you.
exciting piece of local history in there, it sounds like. So
Thank you.
It's fantastic.
Thanks, and
Thanks everyone for coming.
thanks to you. Yeah.
Don't rush out, and feel free to empty my coffee and my hot water on your way out the door. Thanks for everybody coming.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Nice to meet you.